So Donald Trump has dropped bombs on Iran. But is this constitutional? And if it isn't constitutional, is this legal? We know that presidents in the last 30 years seem to have the biggest war boner of any group of presidents in the history of this nation. So let's drill down on this if we can. So let's look at the constitutional war powers of the United States president. Article 2, Section 2 designates the president as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces. It grants him authority to direct military operations once war is declared by Congress or military action is authorized. Now, this role includes the power to repel sudden attacks against the United States, as implied in the president's duty to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. However, the Constitution does not explicitly grant the president the power to initiate war or to conduct offensive military actions without Congress's approval. And this last part is, I think, what we're going to be drilling down on in this video and probably for the next 2 months, is my guess. So we know that every time the U.S. has committed troops to a war, a battle, anything, it has not always been done by a resolution of Congress to initiate war. We don't always have the president going into Congress, and as FDR did in December of 1941, saying, a day that will live in infamy, yada yada yada, and asking Congress to commit troops to war. We don't see that. So let's start with the Korean War. President Truman commits U.S. forces under a UN Security Council resolution, completely bypassing Congress's declaration of war. Now, Congress later funded the effort, which was basically implicitly endorsing it, but they never formally authorized it. Vietnam War. President Johnson escalates the U.S. involvement based on the Gulf of Tonkin resolution in 1964, a broad congressional authorization to use force. However, Congress and different critics argued that the resolution was way too vague, and they actually repealed it 2 years before the war ended. Grenada, 1983. President Reagan ordered a military action without prior congressional approval. He cited the need to protect U.S. citizens, and even though Congress later debated it and argued whether or not this was constitutional, they didn't do anything about it. So they basically said, okay, maybe in some cases you can do it. Clinton, 1999, the Kosovo air campaign. Clinton conducted NATO-led airstrikes without congressional authorization, claiming humanitarian and regional stability goals. This is the thing that we see in that movie Behind Enemy Lines with Owen Wilson and Gene Hackman. Now, this one I think is going to be probably the test subject for what Trump is doing. This and the stuff that Obama did. So in 2011, when Obama intervened in Libya, he authorized airstrikes under a UN resolution, arguing because no ground troops were used, it wasn't a war. So it didn't require congressional approval. That's lame, in my opinion. The administration cited the War Powers Resolution, which was passed in 1973. And what the WPR does is it basically allows the president to use military force for 60 days. But there needs to be a national emergency created by attack upon the United States, its territories or possessions, or its armed forces. And as we know, there has not been an attack on American forces yet. Let's look at the Syria airstrikes under Obama and later Trump from 14 to 18. So these airstrikes that Trump and Obama did, they were targets against ISIS under the 2001 authorization for the U.S. military force. Now, the problem is that this authorization was meant to target Al-Qaeda. And because ISIS grew off of Al-Qaeda, it was kind of seen as okay. But the problem is that 2001 AUMF, as we call it, authorization for use of military force, was supposed to go against terrorist organizations. It didn't name any state actors. It didn't say Iraq, Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya. It didn't say that. So unless you can draw a clear line from Iran to Al-Qaeda, which my understanding at least is that they're proud that there is a line there, but they are a sovereign state, and sovereign states were not included in this authorization. Now, I want to make it very clear, and I should have done this at the very beginning of this video, and I wish I had, but I wholeheartedly do not think that we should be getting involved in this. Do I want Iran to have a nuclear weapon? No. But that doesn't mean that I think we should be involved. Israel seemed quite capable of doing all of that by themselves. There are partners over there. They could have done it. We didn't need to be involved. Now, if this ends and all it is dropping a couple bombs, that's better than it could be. But I don't want to be involved with this. And my hope is that we wake up tomorrow, Iran says, hey, we're done, and everything goes back to normal. But knowing the last 3,000 years of history of the Middle East, I don't see that happening. So does the bombing violate the Constitution? Probably. Most likely it does. But just because it violates the Constitution doesn't mean it's illegal. Because as I talked about, there are several statutory and precedental, a word I'm going to make up, examples where the president doesn't necessarily need permission from Congress. So if we use Obama's definition of war, then Trump's in the clear. And Congress, at least that Congress, seemed to agree with the idea that, well, as long as ground troops aren't committed, then it's not a war. So he can do what he wants. But again, the legality of this is really going to come down to what Congress decides. There are a lot of members of Congress right now saying this violates the War Powers Act. It really doesn't seem to, at least the way I read it, and the way the War Powers Act has been used in the past. The problem is that we cannot draw a line between bombing them and protecting U.S. forces because nothing has happened against U.S. forces. Now, there have been threats, so maybe that works, but it's going to depend on, how if this plays out in Congress. But any member of Congress currently complaining, you know what? If you wanted to have stopped this, you should have passed that new War Powers Act last week. It's been on the floor for a week now, and nothing's happened to it. So all you want to do is be able to campaign off of people not wanting war, the same stuff that you've been doing for 50 years now. We see the same thing from both sides. They campaign on these things, and even when they get super majorities, like the Democrats had through 6 of Obama's 8 years, they don't do anything with them. They could have passed abortion, they could have passed gun legislation, and they didn't, because then they can't campaign off of it the next term. So no one really cares. We're the only ones that seem to care, the citizens. We'll see what happens. Guys, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to comment. Let me know what you think about all this. I'll see y'all next time.